If the 70s and 80s gave us some of the best slasher horror films, then the 90s was the period of slasher horrors that drew heavily from them and tried to bring other elements into the narrative. One of the best examples of these films is I Know What You Did Last Summer, which gave us another killer character called the Fisherman, also known as Ben Willis. However, Fisherman has yet to be given as much credit as his peers in the genre, and this makes us wonder if he was actually on par with the other greats like Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. Let's jump into the lore of the Fisherman to figure out whether he deserves a seat next to the other slasher horror icons of the time. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Ben Willis.
Good. So you've been doing your homework too.
Who is Ben Willis? Unlike the other maniacal characters in the slasher horror genre, the Fisherman has some fear because we are somewhat aware of what drives him as a killer. Or does that make him less scary? Let's go through his lore according to the trilogy of movies where he was established. The Revenge. The story through which the Fisherman was introduced to us is one of the craziest ones you'll hear. You thought Hangover reunited friends from the past? Wait till you see how a murderer brings back old friends as they try to keep a secret between them. Ben Willis was probably a regular fellow until one night he came across 4 teenagers. And that's the film I Know What You Did Last Summer. The teenagers, featuring the likes of Jennifer Love Hewitt, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Ryan Phillip, and Freddie Prinze Jr. were heading out of town for a party when their car hit Ben Willis, who was returning from work. Fans of the 90s might be aware of how each of these actors was present in a wide variety of famous works that became some major hits, while others didn't have a substantial impact. They decided to hide the body instead of calling the authorities, and agreed that they would never talk about it again. Yes, it was a pretty intelligent move from the kids, but precisely 1 year later, now that these friends have completely stopped talking to each other, they'll be brought back together because of this event. It seems that Ben hadn't died, and he was merely unconscious due to the accident. So please remember to make sure that if you're hiding a body in this sort of circumstance, the individual is dead, because you don't want to end up paying a heavy price. Ben Willis is alive and out for revenge to kill these kids one by one, but he's no ordinary killer. He'll put some fear into these kids and kill them as they suffer. He sends a written note to Jennifer Love Hewitt's character saying the film's title, I Know What You Did Last Summer, was enough to cause panic for her. With that, he targets each of the individuals involved with the events where he almost died. But some of his victims are innocent. Let's look at the Big Bang Theory star, who was literally in character as a nerd and became the first victim, even though he wasn't involved with the summer events. As the friends start dying one by one in the Fisherman's hands, well, he has a hook for one of his hands, Julie decides to find out more about Ben Willis, only to find out some crazy information. It seems our serial killer, Ben Willis, was no nice guy himself, after all, because he had killed his late daughter's boyfriend. It was right after killing him that he had come across the teenagers and got hit by their car. But there's a reason why it makes sense that he has anger toward these irresponsible teenagers and goes against them. His daughter died in a car accident, and he blamed her boyfriend, and that's why he killed him. So in a way, Mr. Ben Willis was only killing people who tried to get away with a hit and run. It sounds somewhat noble to me, but his methods sound like he enjoyed it. One of the coolest murders is when he kills Barry, Ryan Phillip's character, in front of Helen, Sarah Michelle Gellar's character, while she's participating in a beauty pageant. This murder is the beginning of the nightmare that Helen will go through until she kills herself before she can reach out for help. Despite many plot holes throughout this arc, it makes for one of the most heart-pounding sequences in the film. But he's also somewhat managed to pit the teens against each other, as the last 2 of his targets, Julie and Ray, Freddie Prinze Jr.'s character, come into an altercation when Julie thinks that he's the Fisherman. Ben uses this as an opportunity and takes Julie to his boat after knocking out Ray, stating that he was there to help, only to reveal his true identity to her, just like every villain, and goes to kill her. But right then, Ray arrives in the situation and saves her as he and Ben go against each other, until Ben's hands get on some rope and chops his hand off. Maybe the hook will become a permanent part now. Finally, Ben gets thrown off into the ocean and his body is lost there, which means that he might still be alive. Of course he is, there are still sequels we have yet. However, an alternate ending was kept for this film, which was finally utilized in a completely different fashion. Julie, one of the 2 survivors of the event, was chatting with someone on her computer when suddenly another user joined in and sent the text, I still know. As she recoiled to it, the Fisherman probably jumped out of the computer and threw his hook at her. This ending would instead be kept as a teaser for the sequel, aptly titled I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, confirming 2 things. Ben Willis is alive, and he's not forgotten about the summer events yet. Still looking for revenge. The sequel, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, brings back Ben Willis, who's purely fixated on Julie this time around. Similarly, Julie hasn't forgotten her last encounter with Ben as he haunts her, affecting her everyday life. Ray tries to convince her to return to the town for an upcoming pageant, but it seems Julie wants a break, and returning to the town might not be the best move for a while. Back in her college, Julie comes across Will Benson. Yeah, that's a peculiar name, and it's somehow very close to another name in this franchise. When her roommate wins a contest to go to the Bahamas, Julie also gets invited, and she asks Ray to, but Ray initially denies it, only planning to join later as a surprise. On the way to Julie's college, Ray is attacked by the fisherman, and this time, he's replaced his severed hand with a hook, giving him another aspect that makes him somewhat iconic in the leagues of Freddy Krueger. But Ray manages to escape the fisherman's attacks, and decides that he has to save Julie and her friends. Meanwhile, Julie and her friends reach the Bahamas, and somehow the fisherman continues to haunt her when the karaoke machine reads, "I still know what you did last summer," instead of the lyrics for Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive." As she runs off, Will, yes, the kid with the peculiar name, follows her and tries to console her. But at this time, the fisherman had begun his spree and started killing individuals outside the hotel one by one. He kills each of them in some creative ways, letting us know that he's not been wasting time and has planned some of this. Sadly, one of these victims was Jack Black, who was killed in a rather gruesome manner. Now the fisherman starts his plan to make Julie suffer by first making everyone think she's going mad when she sees a dead body in her closet, only to find it disappear when she brings the others to show it. The next day, the fisherman locks her inside the tanning bed while increasing the temperature significantly, but luckily, Will and his friends arrive in time to rescue her. Oh, there's a scene that seems like the fisherman pulled some effort into the scares this time, as Julie comes across a grave with a tombstone with Julie's name written on it. Finally, when each of her friends slowly start getting killed, and she tends to Will, he reveals that he was the one who killed one of their friends, and he's Ben Willis' son. Come on, Julie, even the name Will Benson seems like an effort to scare you off psychologically. But the father-son duo won't last long as they try to put up with Julie, and are just about to kill her when Ray arrives and aims his gun at them. Will attacks him and almost manages to beat him, and Ben goes for the final move with his hook, but Ray jumps out of the way, and it goes on to hit Will, killing him. Well, it seems Ben lost another child, but this time due to his own stupidity. But instead of realizing he's responsible, he attacks them. But Julie ends up shooting him multiple times till he falls into the open grave. All that effort on the grave only to fall into it himself. But Julie's nightmares aren't over because one fine day, after quite a while, when Julie and Ray are living together and have bought a home, Julie has another one of these moments. She suspects someone's in the house while Ray is in the bathroom, and suddenly she's pulled under the bed by Ben, and that's where the film ends without telling us if this was a nightmare.
No, up there!
There's a revenge here somewhere. This adventure of a couple of teenagers hasn't ended yet, and this time around, a different group of kids makes the same mistake while joking about the original events. It feels as if each sequel tries to bring some new aspect to the character of the fisherman, making him more mythical and less human with each entry. You'll see. This time around, these new teenagers were pranking people with the events of the fisherman, only to find one of their friends impaled on a pipe. Now, guess what they decide to do? Yeah, they choose to hide the body and burn the evidence and decide to never talk about it again. Even though they joked about the fisherman, they forgot to learn anything from the original events. Anyway, time passes, more like a year passes, and Amber, one of the teenagers, returns to town. It seems as though they've all stopped talking to each other over time. She gets back home only to find that she's received 50 text messages. Yes, the fisherman is using phones now. With the text, "I know what you did last summer." It's respectable how the fisherman updates himself with time and finds innovative ways to scare these teenagers. Again, the fisherman gets on with the plans of killing the teenagers by threatening them with individual moves. Once killing the officer who had witnessed the impaling last year by impaling him with a forklift. But when he finally reveals his face to one of the kids, it looks like it is decomposed, and it's indeed our old friend Ben Willis. There are powers now because when one of the kids stabs him with a knife, nothing seems to have happened to him, and he continues his murder spree. But one thing affects him, the hook, which is said to be the original hook he had, considering he appears to have both hands now. The kids somehow acquired the hook, and when they use it against him, it injures him. They manage to impale him in the head and then lure him into a thresher, which somewhat confirms the possible death. But a year later, seeing a year later again and again makes us wonder if it takes the fisherman precisely a year to repair himself and come back to life to kill the kids. A year later, Amber is driving across the desert when she loses her reception, only to see that Ben Willis is behind her. He slashes his hook at her, but the film cuts to black immediately. So Ben Willis probably killed her, we can assume. Many things about this character need to be clarified, and this is the only entry that puts some major plot holes into the narrative. There's the possibility that using the original hook as a prank somehow brought him back to life, because otherwise it doesn't make sense why he would kill these kids. I mean, it could have been the kid who got impaled, who might have taken up the task who destroyed the kids, but no, it seems that Ben Willis is up to the task, whatever happens. The superpowers make things completely unreal now, and the fear is somewhat reduced because of that. Fans of this genre of killing spree movies have often wondered if the Fisherman can be pitted against the others who have been a part of this League of Gentlemen for a while now. The powers he's now gathered, including teleportation, may give him a chance next to Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, or the much more similar Michael Myers. Is he more powerful than Michael Myers? As a fisherman, it immediately becomes clear from the first film that Ben Willis is quite strong. He hurls people around by stabbing them with his hook and picking them up in the air. There are times when he stabbed multiple times, only to escape without a scratch, and continue his attack. But there was a time in the third film when he seemed to teleport because he appeared in places quite randomly, even though he was seen somewhere else far away. It's still being determined if this was just for the sake of the scares, or if it is an actual power he seems to have now to strike fear into the minds of his enemies, the kids. Suppose we see Michael Myers from this point of view. In that case, Michael is an entirely supernatural being, as he was killed in various manners multiple times, only to come back in one piece and still haunt his enemies. This inverted Captain Kirk is enough to strike fear into the minds of the enemies of this character, and he doesn't need to go for any other tactics to kill his enemies. Even though he doesn't have enemies in particular and kills everyone he comes across quite conveniently, he does have some qualms about Laurie Strode and her family. Remember when Ben sent 50 text messages to Amber? That's a superpower in itself, but then it makes us wonder about the lengths he has to go to scare the kids. The second film showed us how he planned the entire thing, where Ben convinced Julie to go on the trip so he could kill her and involve his son in the plan. But Michael Myers works alone apart from his knife, which he doesn't really have a specific specification for, but he picks up on the way to his killing spree. The fisherman has to interact with his victims a lot, and at times he also explains what he's doing, reducing his persona's fearful aspect. Remember when he described the ordeal to Julie when he got her inside his boat? That's some typical villain moves there. On the other hand, Michael doesn't really care about all that and just goes for the action and kills his victims, and there's hardly any justification for what he's doing. One significant aspect that drives the lore of these killers in these films is the film itself, as it works in a manner that makes the characters more haunting and scary. Since Halloween doesn't explain many aspects of the character, there's no limitation to the lore that can be built. This style is why he's become a supernatural being with multiple returns, even after being killed numerous times. Meanwhile, the Fisherman is a given story, some revenge narrative that makes him a lot more human than any other killer, and then the film just makes some crazy choices which are supposed to increase the fear effect of the character, but instead only manage to create some crazy plot holes that are never resolved. How did he manage to survive the car accident? And how is he able to come back in the third film even though he didn't have a solid reason to kill them? There's a fun fact associated with the first film, considering the film was released with the tagline that it's from the creators of Scream. Even though the people behind the Scream franchise sued them and got the line removed, fans of Scream would instantly identify the potential that I Know What You Did Last Summer had, and even then it didn't explore certain elements. Marvelous verdict. Creating a maniacal killer character isn't easy. The fact that you would have to develop an entire franchise with the studios and make these projects a means of pumping money makes it much more complicated than it should be. The creators of Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and even Rubberface ensured that the lore couldn't be affected, even though they later became franchises with some poorly made sequels. But yes, one thing we cannot deny about I Know What You Did Last Summer is that it strongly impacted the audience when it first came out. However, the attempt at bringing the Fisherman back multiple times made the character somewhat weak. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.